What happens when a person's life is turned upside down and they find themselves in a situation they never imagined? Riley, a woman in her early 20s, has just discovered she's pregnant and feels completely alone, abandoned by her partner and without a home. She needs to find a way to survive. In a moment of desperation, she accepts a job as a caregiver for a paralyzed billionaire, a job that seems promising but also brings unexpected challenges. 1 week after starting, something remarkable happens, forever changing the course of their lives. Riley always dreamed of having a different life, full of love and stability. Born in a small town in the United States, her childhood memories were filled with hope and joy. However, the reality she faces now is far from her dreams. Alone and pregnant, financial pressure leads her to accept the job that seems to be her only way out. The work involves caring for Nathan, a billionaire who suffered a traumatic accident and became paralyzed. What should have been just a job transforms into an emotional challenge. The environment Riley finds herself in is hostile and challenging. Nathan's luxurious mansion is a symbol of the success she never had, but it's also a place where she feels out of place and insecure. Nathan, in turn, is a man of few words, trapped in a body that doesn't respond. He lives surrounded by assistance and technology, but is emotionally isolated. The interaction between them is tense at first, as Riley doesn't know how to handle her new reality and her own insecurities. The conflict begins to unfold when Riley realizes that Nathan, despite his condition, possesses an inner strength she admires. However, he also carries his own wounds and traumas, making them more similar than they could imagine. The connection between them develops slowly as Riley faces her fears and insecurities, and Nathan tries to find a new purpose amid his physical limitation. The initial interactions between them are marked by a heavy and uncomfortable silence. Riley hesitates to speak, fearing her words might be inappropriate. Nathan, on the other hand, observes his new caregiver with a critical eye, trying to understand who she really is. But as the days pass, unexpected moments of vulnerability begin to emerge. Riley shares her story, and Nathan, in his own way, reveals that he too is struggling to accept his new life. An initial event that changes Riley's perspective occurs when she discovers that the baby she's expecting might be the key to healing her own emotional wounds. This new reality begins to open her eyes to what really matters in life: human connection and the ability to love, even in the most difficult circumstances. The challenge of caring for Nathan transforms into a journey of self-discovery, where both begin to learn from each other. As time progresses, Riley and Nathan's story intertwines in unexpected ways, creating a bond that defies the limits of what each believed possible. This unlikely relationship not only offers them a new perspective on life, but also forces them to confront their deepest fears and find a way to move forward together. Their journey is just beginning, and what happens next promises to be remarkable. Riley felt increasingly overwhelmed. The pressure of caring for Nathan, a man who seemed so distant and bitter, was a challenge that made her question her own strength. On a particularly difficult morning, while organizing medications and preparing breakfast, a moment of weakness hit her. Nathan sat in his wheelchair, watching her with a look that mixed curiosity and disdain. She felt the weight of her own situation, the loneliness that accompanied her, and the fear of the future. That week, Riley's routine solidified. She woke up early, cared for Nathan, and tried to find time for her own thoughts. However, the emotional pressure became unbearable. As days passed, Riley encountered the challenges of being a caregiver, something she had never imagined doing. There were moments when Nathan challenged her with his silence and resistance. He didn't help her, didn't encourage her. It was as if he was testing the limits of her patience, and it left her frustrated. One day, while trying to help Nathan get dressed, he interrupted her with a harsh response. "You don't know what you're doing, do you?" Those words cut deep. Riley felt heat rise in her face, a mixture of indignation and sadness. She turned quickly, trying to hide the tears that threatened to fall. It was hard to realize that despite all her efforts, she wasn't enough for him. But Riley's life wasn't just about work challenges. Outside the mansion, she faced the pressure of her pregnancy. What once seemed like a blessing now became a burden. Financial worries haunted her, and every time she looked in the mirror, the image of a young, single mother frightened her. Moreover, frequent visits from her mother, who insisted she come back home, only amplified her insecurity. "You need support, Riley. You're not alone in this," her mother would say, but each word seemed like a reminder that she had no place to belong. Among Nathan's assistants was a woman named Grace, who had become an unexpected friend. Grace was an experienced nurse and, unlike Nathan, was always willing to listen. She noticed Riley's struggle and tried to encourage her. "You're stronger than you think, Riley. Don't let him bring you down," Grace would say, as they sat on the living room couch having coffee during their brief breaks. But even Grace's words weren't enough to erase the feeling of inadequacy that dominated Riley. The tension between her and Nathan was growing. One night, while watching a documentary about people with disabilities overcoming challenges, Nathan surprised her with a sarcastic comment about the futility of the programming. "Why do you keep trying? It's not like I can change," he said, his voice heavy with bitterness. That phrase made Riley's heart race. She felt that Nathan wasn't just referring to his physical condition, but also to his own life. He was reflecting the doubts she herself had. It was at this moment that Riley decided she couldn't let herself be discouraged. She needed to find a way to connect with Nathan, to show him that even in the most difficult situations, there was hope. However, this decision wasn't easy. It was a constant internal struggle. Each interaction became an emotional battle. She needed to be strong, but the fragility of her own situation made her vulnerable. In the following days, while arranging the books on Nathan's shelf, she found a hidden diary. Curious, she began to flip through the pages. Nathan's words revealed a man who once dreamed, who had passion for life and ambitions. The pages were filled with frustration and loss, and Riley realized that behind the mask of indifference was a man who desperately wanted to recover something that seemed lost. This discovery made her rethink her approach. Riley began to talk more with Nathan, to share her own story, her struggles, and her fears. The connection began to form slowly, and she realized that despite the difficulties they faced, both were, in a way, prisoners of their own circumstances. But the path to this connection wouldn't be easy. Obstacles continued to arise. The main challenge was Nathan's resistance to accepting help and the pain he felt when looking at his new reality. For Riley, it was a constant test of patience and understanding, and on some nights, she wondered if she could continue. Each small step toward empathy and understanding became a victory, but also a reminder of how far she still had to go. Riley's journey was just beginning, and the challenges that would come next would be decisive in shaping not only her relationship with Nathan, but also her own identity and inner strength. The day started quietly, but soon the routine transformed into a battlefield. Riley struggled to reposition Nathan in his wheelchair, and he looked at her with disdain. Every movement seemed like a challenge, and her frustration grew with each second. "You really don't know how to do this," he snapped, his harsh tone echoing through the room. Riley felt despair rise in her chest. Those words hit her like an arrow, and for a moment, everything she had fought to build seemed to crumble. The pressure was building up. Not just the pressure of caring for Nathan, but also the pressure of her pregnancy, which left her exhausted. She could barely sleep at night, and insomnia had become a constant companion. What was once an exciting expectation now became a heavy burden. With each passing day, the weight of responsibility crushed her more. Riley often found herself lost in thoughts about what her future would be like, and these worries drove her even further from Nathan. Her mother's visits became more frequent, and conversations about coming home became an exhausting mantra. "You need support, Riley. This isn't something you can face alone," her mother insisted, but Riley felt trapped in a maze with no exit. The idea of returning to her parents' house was an invitation to surrender, and this made her even more frustrated. She didn't want to be seen as weak, but the growing pressure was making her feel exactly that. One day, after a heated argument with Nathan, where he accused her of being a mediocre caregiver, Riley had a breakdown. She locked herself in the bathroom and let the tears flow. The reflection in the mirror showed a tired, worn-out and lost woman. What was she doing with her life? The idea of failing both as a caregiver and as a mother consumed her. Grace, the nurse who had become her friend, noticed something was wrong. During one of their breaks, she sat next to Riley and said, "You don't need to carry this weight alone. It's normal to feel lost. You're going through a huge transformation." Grace's words were a balm, but doubt still persisted. How could she be strong when everything around her seemed to be falling apart? Meanwhile, Nathan, in his own solitude, struggled against the demons of his past and his new present. He felt increasingly powerless, and the bitterness in his heart grew. The anger he felt about his condition manifested in harsh words, and this affected not only his relationship with Riley, but also his own sanity. In a moment of weakness, he let himself be carried away by despair and decided he no longer wanted help. He distanced himself from Riley, isolating himself in his world of pain and resentment. This decision had a profound impact on Riley. Nathan's absence, even though full of bitterness, made her realize how much she wanted him to open up. With each passing day, she felt more alone. The moments they spent together, even if tense, were what kept her tethered to reality. Now, with Nathan pulling away, the loneliness became unbearable. The emptiness in her life became more evident. Weeks passed, and the tension increased. On a particularly challenging day, Riley decided she couldn't continue like this anymore. With Grace's help, she made a plan to try to reconnect with Nathan. She wanted him to understand that he wasn't alone in his pain. In a courageous attempt, she decided to take Nathan for a walk in the park. The fresh air and nature could make a difference, she thought. However, Nathan's reaction was negative. "Why are you doing this? It doesn't make any difference," he shouted, his voice echoing among the trees. Riley's heart broke, but she didn't give up. "Please, Nathan, I just want you to know that I'm here. I care about you." The sincerity in her voice made Nathan hesitate. He wanted to scream, wanted to pull away, but there was something in her determination that struck him. That day transformed into an emotional battlefield. Riley was exhausted, but the fight wasn't just within her. It was a clash of two lost souls trying to find their way back to each other. The unspoken words and repressed feelings were about to explode. Each of them needed to face their own limitations, and the path ahead seemed increasingly foggy. The following days were marked by frustrated attempts at communication. Riley began to feel helpless, while Nathan sank deeper into his bitterness. But even in the darkest hours, small victories emerged. An involuntary smile from Nathan when Riley made a joke, or a look of understanding in his eyes when she talked about her own struggles. These small interactions were like beacons, illuminating a road that seemed dark. The connection they both sought was forming, but it was fragile and full of twists. Each step forward could easily turn into 2 steps back. The difficulties were piling up, and the future seemed uncertain. However, Riley was determined not to give up, even when the path became more complicated. She knew the struggle wasn't just about caring for Nathan, but also about finding strength within herself. And so, the journey continued. As the days dragged on, the tension between Riley and Nathan became increasingly palpable. They were trapped in a cycle of frustration, where attempts at communication seemed to turn into battles. Each fought their own internal wars, and the emotional distance between them seemed to grow. Riley felt increasingly tired and alone, while Nathan sank into his own bitterness and revolt. It was on a rainy afternoon that everything changed. The sky was grey and reflected Riley's state of mind. She was trying once again to organize Nathan's room, but the mess seemed to reflect the chaos in her mind. While tidying up, she found a small notebook that Nathan used before the accident. Curious, she opened the notebook and began to flip through the pages. Nathan's words danced before her eyes. He wrote about his dreams, his hopes, and the little things that made him happy. On one of the pages, she found a passage that made her stop. "I will never give up on my dreams, even if everything seems impossible." The words echoed a strength that Riley hadn't seen in him for a long time. She felt a wave of emotions wash over her. Nathan's pain was real, but he still had a fighting spirit, something that seemed to have been lost amid his frustration. Riley decided it was time to act. With the notebook in hand, she went to Nathan, who was sitting in the living room, absorbed in his own thoughts. "Nathan," she began, her voice trembling, "I found this." She held out the notebook to him, her heart beating fast. "Look what you wrote. You still have dreams. You still have hopes. We can't let this slip away." Nathan looked at the notebook, his eyes widening as he read the words that had once come from his own mind. At first, his expression was one of disdain, but it quickly changed to a mixture of confusion and pain. "That was before all this," he mumbled, the bitterness returning. "Before I felt trapped, before I felt useless." Those words hit Riley like a punch to the stomach. She realized that Nathan had not only distanced himself from her, but also from who he really was. He was trapped in a cycle of self-criticism and despair. This revelation made her feel a wave of compassion, but also a renewed determination. "You're not useless, Nathan. You're more than that. We have to find a way to believe in ourselves again, one step at a time." Nathan looked at her, his eyes full of a mixture of anger and sadness. "What if I can't? What if I fail again?" He was at his limit, and the vulnerability in his voice made Riley want to protect him. But she also knew she needed to be honest. "You will fail, Nathan, and that's okay. We all fail. But what matters is what we do afterward. We can learn from it. We can rise again." Riley's words were simple but loaded with truth. The internal struggle they both faced couldn't be won alone, and that required courage from both of them. In that moment, something changed within Nathan. The barriers he had built began to crumble, and a spark of hope appeared in his eyes. "You really believe that?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Believe that I can still be who I was?" Riley nodded, her heart pounding with new vigor. "Yes, I believe, but we need to do this together. We can't carry this weight alone. Let's find a new path, together." The sincerity in her words seemed to resonate with Nathan, and he realized that maybe there was still a path ahead. The rain outside began to subside, and sunlight started breaking through the clouds. It was as if the universe was responding to the new energy emerging between them. Nathan took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, felt a lightness he thought he had lost forever. From that day on, they began working together. Nathan started exploring his passions again, while Riley sought support in mothers and caregivers groups, learning that she wasn't alone in her struggles. They became a team, facing challenges together and learning to communicate their emotions more openly. Although difficulties still existed, their journey was now immersed in a new sense of purpose. Nathan learned to look to the future with hope, and Riley, in turn, began to rediscover the strength within herself. They realized that even in the shadows, there was the possibility of light, and that together they could find a path to a new beginning. The change in dynamics between Riley and Nathan was palpable. In the days following that rainy afternoon, the atmosphere in their home began to transform. Nathan, now more receptive, started opening up about his feelings. He talked about his insecurities, his frustrations, and especially about the dreams he still held. Riley listened attentively, encouraging him to share more. It was as if a new bond was forming between them, a bond based on honesty and vulnerability. However, new challenges quickly emerged. Nathan still fought against his internal demons. Sometimes, even when Riley's words penetrated his heart, the shadow of doubt enveloped him again. One morning, while trying to remember an old art project he loved so much, he felt paralyzed. The blank sheet in front of him seemed like an abyss, and frustration overwhelmed him. "I can't do this," he said, his voice choked as he moved away from the table. "It's as if everything I try is in vain." Riley, who who was nearby, noticed the instant change in his mood. "You just need to take one step at a time," she said, trying to offer support. "Remember how you started before. It doesn't need to be perfect. What matters is trying." But her words didn't seem to reach Nathan at that moment. He just shook his head and pulled away, closing himself off in his pain again. Riley felt powerless, a feeling she hadn't known well since they started working together. She knew that Nathan's struggle wasn't something he could overcome overnight, but the weight of discouragement was hard to watch. So, she decided to seek help outside the home. She began attending support group meetings, where she met other people facing similar challenges. These interactions brought a new understanding of the complexity of what Nathan was going through. She heard stories from other mothers who also had children struggling with depression and anxiety. The feeling of not being alone encouraged her, and she decided she needed to share these experiences with Nathan. One night, while preparing dinner, Riley told Nathan about the group. "I met people who are going through similar situations. They also have difficult days and sleepless nights. And you know what they do? They support each other," she said while stirring the pot. "We can do that too." Nathan looked at her skeptically. "And what would that change? I'm still me, and the struggle is still mine." There was a deep sadness in his voice, and Riley understood that he wasn't ready to accept help yet. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she replied, putting the spoon aside. "I'm here with you. We're in this together. And if you need space, that's okay, but don't hesitate to reach out to me." Nathan didn't respond immediately, but the seed of the idea was planted. In the following days, as Nathan struggled to find inspiration, he began to observe Riley more closely. He noticed how she strived to be present, even when her own emotions were running high. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the weariness in her voice. The last thing he wanted was to be a burden to her. Then, in a moment of reflection, Nathan decided he needed to do something different. He took the notebook Riley had found and began writing again. The words started to flow, and he realized that just like before, writing helped him organize his thoughts and emotions. Even though it wasn't easy, he was determined to rediscover the part of himself that had been lost. While he was writing, Riley entered the room and watched him in silence. There was a new hope in her gaze. "Are you writing?" she asked, an involuntary smile appearing on her face. Nathan looked at her, hesitant, but then nodded. "I'm trying," he said, a bit embarrassed. "That's wonderful," Riley exclaimed. "Can I see?" Nathan hesitated, but then decided he could share a part. He read aloud some of the phrases he had written, and the emotion in his voice was palpable. Riley listened attentively, and her expression was one of enchantment and pride. "These words are powerful, Nathan. You're reconnecting with who you are," she said, her eyes shining. In that moment, Nathan felt a warmth inside him that he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that, even amid pain and uncertainty, there was still room for creativity and hope. Thus, despite the new obstacles and emotional difficulties that still lay ahead, both were beginning to understand that they didn't need to face everything alone. They could support each other, share their struggles, and celebrate small victories together. And as a new light was kindling in their lives, they allowed themselves to dream again, one step at a time. Nathan was at a crucial point in his life. The words he had written in recent weeks were beginning to form a new narrative, one that reflected his struggles but also his hopes. He remembered how lost and paralyzed he felt before, as if trapped in a maze with no exit. Now, as he wrote, he felt he was finding his way again, one step at a time. He realized that the change within him wasn't just about writing, but about how he began to see himself. There was a time when he saw himself only as someone who failed, someone who couldn't move forward. But with Riley's support and the experiences he began to share, he started to understand that each challenge was an opportunity for growth. What once seemed like a burden became a chance to reconnect with his essence. One afternoon, while reviewing his notes, Nathan found a passage that made him think deeply. He remembered a conversation he had with Riley, where she mentioned the importance of being gentle with oneself. He realized he had spent too much time pushing himself, comparing himself to unrealistic standards. He began to understand that success wasn't measured only by external achievements, but also by the courage to face his internal battles and to rise after each fall. Nathan decided he needed to change this perspective. He began treating himself with more compassion. When he felt he couldn't create, instead of letting frustration take over, he would breathe deeply and remember that it was okay not to be okay. He learned to accept bad days as part of his journey without letting them bring him down. This new mindset wasn't easy to adopt, but constant practice brought unexpected relief. Riley's support was also fundamental in this process. He began to open up more with her, sharing not only his victories but also his weaknesses. They would sit together, talking about the fears and insecurities that still haunted him. This exchange not only strengthened the bond between them, but also allowed Nathan to see himself as part of something bigger. He wasn't alone in his struggle. There were people who cared and were willing to support him. Over time, Nathan felt more confident in his abilities. He began to engage in small art projects again, something he had abandoned for a long time. Sometimes, while working on his creations, he remembered the feeling of freedom that art gave him. Each brushstroke, each line, became a step toward his recovery. He realized that the creative process wasn't just a form of expression, but also a form of healing. The support group meetings that Riley attended also had a significant impact. He decided to accompany Riley to one of these meetings, a step that required courage. Upon hearing others' stories, he realized that his struggles weren't unique. There was comfort in knowing that others faced similar challenges. These connections helped Nathan understand that vulnerability wasn't a sign of weakness, but rather an important part of being human. Through these experiences, he began applying the lessons he learned in his daily life. Instead of letting himself be consumed by the fear of failure, he started facing new challenges with an open mind. He allowed himself to fail, knowing that each mistake was a learning opportunity. This new approach brought a sense of freedom he hadn't felt in years. As Nathan continued his journey, his friendship with Riley evolved in surprising ways. They weren't just allies in the fight against pain and uncertainty. They became creative partners. Together, they explored new ideas and projects, supporting each other every step of the way. This unusual friendship not only helped Nathan grow, but also allowed Riley to feel stronger and more capable. As months passed, Nathan began to see life through a new lens. The pain still existed, but it no longer defined him. He learned that true wealth wasn't measured in material possessions, but in the experiences and connections he made. Each smile, each laugh shared with Riley, each word written in his notebook was a testimony to his resilience. Finally, on a quiet night, while watching the starry sky through the window, Nathan felt a wave of gratitude. He had faced his demons, and despite the challenges he might still encounter ahead, knew he didn't have to go through it alone. He was ready to continue his journey, armed with the wisdom he had acquired and the certainty that each step, no matter how small, was a step toward healing and transformation. Nathan was at a turning point in his life. After months of internal struggle, he had found a new purpose through writing and art. But now he faced a challenge that threatened to crumble everything he had built. A proposal from an important editor had reached him, an invitation to publish his first book. It was the opportunity he had always dreamed of, but at the same time, the pressure consumed him. He had only a few weeks to present a final draft, and insecurity began to erode the confidence he had gained. That night, as rain fell outside, Nathan sat at his desk, surrounded by sheets of paper and pens. Anxiety turned into a weight in his chest, and he began to doubt his abilities. What if I'm not good enough? The question echoed in his mind, a cruel reminder of the insecurities that had always accompanied him. He looked at the blank screen in front of him, feeling that the pressure was about to swallow all the progress he had made. Riley noticed he was struggling and decided to intervene. She entered the room, her eyes reflecting concern. "Nathan, are you still writing?" she asked, her voice soft. He forced a smile, but knew he wasn't fooling anyone. "I'm trying, but I can't find the right words." She sat beside him and picked up one of his papers. "Remember what you told me about being gentle with yourself. It doesn't have to be perfect right away, just right. Let it flow." Nathan looked at her, admiring the determination in her gaze, but the negative voice inside him wouldn't stop. What if this isn't good enough? What if nobody likes it? Riley took a deep breath. "Nathan, you care about what others think, but what about you? What do you want to say with your story? What have you learned? That's what's most important." Her words penetrated his mind like a light in the darkness. He began to reflect on his journey, on how he had overcome his difficulties, and how each written page was a part of him. While the storm raged outside, Nathan felt the internal storm beginning to calm. He closed his eyes for a moment and, instead of letting fear take over, decided to focus on what really mattered. What did he want to convey in his book? What did he want other people to feel when reading it? The answer began to emerge in his mind. He wanted people to know they weren't alone, that struggle was a part of life, and that there was beauty in vulnerability. With this new perspective, he picked up his pen and began to write. The words started to flow, and with each sentence, he felt the weight dissipating. He was no longer writing to please others, but to express himself. Nathan realized that the real challenge wasn't perfection, but the courage to show who he really was. As he wrote, Riley watched him with a smile on her face. Their friendship had solidified even more in this moment. He was allowing himself to be vulnerable, and she knew this was a crucial step in his journey. Nathan looked up and met her gaze. "Thank you, Riley, for always being here." The rain began to subside, and with it, the anxiety that had consumed him. Nathan continued writing until morning light began streaming through the window. He had completed a draft that reflected not only his struggles, but also his victories. In this process, he had learned that failures were opportunities for growth, and that true success came from being authentic. On the day of submitting the manuscript, Nathan felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. He had overcome his fears and was ready to present his work to the world. As he handed over the draft, he realized that regardless of the outcome, he had achieved something much greater, the ability to accept himself and value his own voice. As he walked back, he felt light. He had faced his biggest challenge, and in doing so discovered a strength he didn't know he possessed. Nathan knew the journey was far from over, but now he had confidence in his ability to face whatever lay ahead. And above all, he knew he didn't have to go through it alone. His friendship with Riley had become a pillar in his life, a constant reminder that vulnerability can transform into strength, and that each step, no matter how small, was a step toward true freedom. Nathan walked through the city streets, the morning sunlight illuminating his face and bringing new energy to his being. Submitting the manuscript was a milestone in his life, and he felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Not that the insecurity had completely disappeared, it was still there, but now he had a new perspective. He had allowed himself to be vulnerable, and that made him, in a way, stronger. In the days that followed, Nathan allowed himself to breathe a little more. He began receiving messages of support from friends and family, all eager to know about his book. Each message was a reminder that he wasn't alone on this journey. Although anxiety was still part of his life, he realized there was room for hope and gratitude. Riley, always by his side, noticed the change in Nathan. He was more open, more willing to share his thoughts and feelings. On a sunny afternoon, while having coffee at a small bistro, she observed him, a satisfied smile on her lips. "You seem different, Nathan. Lighter. How do you feel now that you've submitted the manuscript?" He smiled, looking into her eyes. "I feel that regardless of what happens, I did what I needed to do. I wrote my truth, and that's liberating." The words came out with a sincerity that surprised him. He wasn't just speaking to please her, it was a truth that echoed within him. The conversation flowed naturally, and Nathan realized that his vulnerability had not only helped him, but also brought them even closer. Riley seemed to understand his struggles, and this connection was a foundation he never wanted to lose. "I really appreciate you being here, Riley. Your friendship gave me courage." She smiled, a sparkle in her eyes. "You always had that courage, Nathan. I just helped you see it." Her words resonated in his heart, and he felt grateful to have someone who believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. The days passed, and waiting for the editor's response began to feel like torture. Nathan found refuge in painting, a new hobby he had started to distract himself. He allowed himself to explore colors and shapes, creating worlds that reflected his emotions. Each brushstroke was a new outlet, a new way to express himself. Art became an extension of his writing, and he began to see how the two forms of expression intertwined. Finally, an email from the editor arrived. Nathan felt his heart race as he opened the message. The response was direct and graceful. They were interested in publishing his book, but some revisions were needed. His first reaction was a mix of joy and nervousness. He had done it, but this also meant more work. However, instead of letting it bring him down, he faced the task as an opportunity for growth. The feedback was constructive, and as he read the suggestions, he realized he still had much to learn. But now he was open to it. "You won't believe it," Nathan exclaimed when telling Riley about the response. "They want to publish it, but they asked for some changes." Her expression lit up with enthusiasm. "That's amazing. It means you're on the right track. And you'll do this, Nathan. You always do." His confidence grew, and he dove headfirst into the revisions. The pressure still existed, but now it was a positive pressure. He felt in control, with a new understanding that the writing journey is never a straight path. There were ups and downs, but each contributed to growth. On a quiet afternoon, while revising his manuscript, Nathan paused. Looking out the window, he reflected on everything he had experienced in the past few months. The struggle, the discovery, the vulnerability, and the friendship. He realized that these experiences had not only shaped his writing, but also transformed him as a person. Now, he felt more connected to himself and others. "I'm grateful for every step I've taken," he murmured to himself. And looking at the computer screen, he understood that, regardless of how his story would be received, the true victory had already been won. The ability to express himself and accept himself. Nathan knew that life would continue to challenge him, but he was ready. He had his voice, his art, and more importantly, he had people by his side like Riley, who would support him every step of the way. Nathan looked at the computer screen, his hands hovering over the keyboard. The revised manuscript was almost ready, and he felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement. Every word he had carefully chosen represented a part of his journey, a journey full of challenges, fears, and most importantly, overcoming. He had learned the importance of vulnerability, not just as a writer, but as a human being. While reviewing the text, he remembered the messages of support he had received. Each one encouraged him to continue, to believe in himself. He realized that true wealth wasn't in having a published book, but in the connections he had cultivated along the way. Riley's friendship, her unconditional support, was a crucial factor in this transformation. He thought about how her presence had brightened his days and given him strength when insecurity threatened to overwhelm him. Nathan stood up and walked to the window. The afternoon sun illuminated the city, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He was no longer the same man who had first submitted the manuscript. He had grown. The lessons he learned about acceptance, courage, and the ability to start over were the true trophies he carried with him. And even though the future was uncertain, he was ready to face it. He knew that each day brought new opportunities to reinvent himself. However, while lost in thought, an email notification appeared on his phone. It was a message from the editor, and his heart raced again. With trembling hands, he opened the message. The words, however, weren't what he expected. Instead of confirmation of publication, the editor explained that, after a more thorough review, they had decided not to proceed with the project. The response fell like a bomb in his chest. He read and reread the message, trying to process the reality before him. Disappointment threatened to swallow all the hope he had built. Nathan felt a lump in his throat, and unwanted tears began to well up. He had put so much of himself into that manuscript, so much of his vulnerability and dreams, and now everything seemed to crumble. But looking out the window again, he saw Riley approaching, her smile lighting up the environment. She entered and, noticing the expression on his face, rushed to him. "What happened?" she asked, concerned. Nathan explained, his voice choked. Riley listened attentively, and when he finished, she held his hands. "This is just an obstacle, Nathan. You can't let this define your journey." Her words struck him deeply. Nathan realized that although this rejection was painful, it wasn't the end of his story. He had learned to get up before and knew he could do it again. "You're right," he responded, determination beginning to rise from within him. "This won't stop me." Nathan's journey had been marked by ups and downs, but each experience shaped the man he had become. He decided that instead of letting it bring him down, he would use this rejection as fuel to continue writing. Art and writing were his true passions, and he wouldn't give up on them. Life, after all, was made of new beginnings. Nathan smiled at Riley, a smile that reflected not only hope, but also the strength he had found within himself. And as they talked about the next steps, he knew that regardless of what happened, he would always have his voice, his art, and above all, a friendship that would support him through every twist and turn. And you? Have you ever faced a challenge that seemed like an end, but revealed itself as a new beginning? Share your experiences in the comments and inspire others to find strength in adversity. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us that each chapter of our lives can bring valuable lessons. It's time to act and connect.